Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. It's my privilege and honor to invite everybody. I'm Archana Lakhotia and I'll be your Master of Ceremony for the evening. I extend a very warm welcome to all the distinguished guests who are present here. I would like to extend a special welcome for Dr. Karan Singh, who, despite his busy schedule, has taken time off and graced us with his presence. Dr. Karan Singh is a distinguished political figure of the country who was the youngest minister in the Union Cabinet. He has served in various capacities over decades, like Minister of Tourism and Civil Aviation, Minister of Education and Culture, to name a few. In addition of his political career, he is world-renowned scholar in Vedic writings and is associated with world-renowned NGOs dedicated to the mission of inter-religion harmony. I request everybody present here to applaud Dr. Karan Singh. Please kindly accept this flower bouquet from us, sir. We also have on the dais Mr. Amarnath Verma, who's the publisher. And actually now I would like to present the flower bouquet to the author, Mr. Gauri Shankar Gupta.
He's the only one who deserves it.
So now I invite Dr. Karan Singh and Mr. Verma to please light the lamp and start the ceremony. I would like to invite Dr. Shri Amarnath Verma, Chairman of Star Publications Private Limited, to make his welcome remarks.
Honorable Dr. Karan Singh ji, respected friends from foreign missions and the media, ladies and gentlemen. On this occasion of the release of the book Unraveling Mysteries of Life, written by our ambassador in Hungary, Sri Gauri Shankar Gupta, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you that you could spare time to grace this occasion. Dr. Karan Singh ji has always been a great source of inspiration and encouragement on occasions relating to art, religion, culture and literature, and today he has very kindly accepted our request to grace this occasion in spite of his very busy schedules, for which we are very grateful to him. The book Unraveling Mysteries of India, Mysteries of Life, was published in Hungarian and English sometimes back, but because of the busy programs of the writer, who is the ambassador in Hungary, Mr. Gupta could not come to Delhi earlier for formal release of this book, the English edition books. Mr. Gupta has written many other books also during his tenure of Indian Foreign Services on literature, politics and history. One of his books, Mongolia, the Land of Blue Skies, needs a special reference. Two of his earlier poetry collections in Hindi were also published by us, and now we feel proud for having published this book, which is being released today. Besides Hindi and English, Mr. Gupta is also a fluent speaker of French and Spanish, and he has traveled very widely to more than 70 countries of the world. In the words of Mr. Peter Muller, a scholar of Budapest, this book exposes vision of Mr. Gupta, who carries in his heart and soul and deals with questions that govern the world and human existence in the light of modern science and ancient wisdom. As the publisher of this book, I congratulate Mr. Gupta for this great book and look forward some such books in future also. Thank you so much.
आप लोग जो पीछे बैठे हैं आगे क्यों नहीं आ जाते थे? लॉट्स ऑफ एम्प्टी चेयर्स है, वो पीछे बैठे हुए लोग.
Thank you, sir. I now invite the author, Mr. Gauri Shankar Gupta, to introduce his book, Unraveling Mysteries of Life.
Respected Dr. Karan Singh, Amarnath ji, very distinguished guests who are present here this evening, and of course the Master of Ceremony who is leading us to conduct this program today. Thank you very much for your presence. I am honored and privileged to have all of you here. But I would like to express my profound thanks to Dr. Karan Singh, who is, as you know, a great scholar in Vedic writings. He is known the world over. He has been working tirelessly to promote interreligious harmony through his talks, through his writings, through his work with various NGOs and other international institutions around the globe. I am very happy that he could find time, despite his extremely busy schedule, to be here today. So my profound thanks to you, sir, for being present and agreeing to launch this book. As I always call, he is like the sun, and I'm not even a lamp in front of his knowledge on Vedic writings. And then I'm thankful to Amarnath ji for publishing this book. He has always been very gracious and kind, and the publication has come out extremely well. And of course Anil ji, who worked very hard. I coordinated with him most of the things. So thank you very much for bringing it out. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the book. The people asked me that this is a very ambitious title, Unraveling Mysteries of Life. Can you really unravel the mysteries of life? And I said, and I have been saying this, that yes, these mysteries have already been unraveled by our ancestors. We just have to recapture what they said in the past. And that is where we stand. Now, what are the mysteries of the creation? If we sit out on the roof of a house in the evening, we see the vast blue sky with infinite horizons, with millions of stars. We see the horizon is absolutely vast and infinite. Then we see the variety of life. We see millions of varieties of life. Apart from human beings, we have animals, we have birds, we have fishes, how they are created, how they recreate themselves, how they survive. All these questions do arise in the minds of the humanity once a while. According to the modern science, the size of the universe, as they have calculated based on their observations, is approximately 46 to 78 billion light years. And you know, 1 light year is the speed of light travels in a second. How much it travels in a year. So that is a mind-boggling figure. So the size of the universe, according to them, is 46 to 78 billion light years. with approximately 100 billion galaxies, and each galaxy with 100 to 400 million stars. So imagine this enormous, vast universe, and this universe is only in the so-called 4% observable part of the universe, because 96% the scientists say is dark energy, is dark hole, it cannot be observed because light never reaches there. So imagine the size of this universe which we live in. Now, despite all the size, the sun rises precisely at time, the moon rises precisely at time, and the stars move, they don't collide in the space. How they move, how they work so smoothly. And we human beings do collide, but not the natural forces. And imagine this, the change of seasons. If it is delayed by a few weeks, how difficult it becomes for us to live. The change of seasons come very smoothly. When the autumn comes, the trees shed their leaves. When the spring comes, the life regenerates itself. How it happens? Is there anything which is regulating all this? Yes, there is a regulator. Now, to understand these mysteries, I normally call that we must understand some fundamental principles of the functioning of the nature. And I will enumerate these 4 or 5 principles which will make us think and understand the mysteries of life. The first of these principles is that as the existence becomes more and more powerful, it becomes more and more subtle. It becomes, in Sanskrit they call it becomes suksham. It starts becoming more and more subtle as it becomes more and more powerful. Let me give you some practical example, 1 or 2, to explain this. For example, food is very important for us to eat. We can touch the food, we can see it, we can smell it. It's gross. It's totally within the grasp of our senses. But people can live without food for 50 years. Some people can live for 2 months. What about water? Water is less gross than the food. You can still see it is gross, but much less. It's more subtle than the food. How many days can we live without water? Maybe 10 days, maybe 6 days, maybe 10 days, 12 days. Not more than that. And what about air? It becomes more subtle, more powerful. How many minutes can we live without air? And it becomes more and more subtle. It goes beyond the grasp. Slowly it goes beyond the grasp of our senses. Let me give you another example of the human body itself. Our body is a miraculous creation. It has mind-boggling mechanism inside. The food we eat is inanimate. We eat bread and we eat juice and we take tea, coffee. It becomes blood and flesh and bones with intelligence inside. How it happens? This is a mind-boggling. From the live body we have these inanimate things which come out and we can do anything with them. So I'm not going to talk about the miracles of the body, but the body is gross. We can see it, we can touch it. This gross big body is controlled by our senses, which are much smaller, just suksham compared to the body. If we cannot see, if we cannot hear, if we cannot talk, the body is like a vegetable. So the smaller senses control our body. And then what about senses? Senses are not all that powerful. They're the second weakest part of the human constitution. The senses are controlled by your mind. You will listen to me now. Your ears are here, but you will not listen to me unless your mind is here. Sometimes you sit down in front of a TV for half an hour. You don't know what is going on there. Your eyes are there, but your mind is somewhere else, and therefore you cannot grasp what is going on there. So it is all said that it is the mind which sees, it is the mind which listens, it is the mind which smells, mind which tastes. So the mind is where? It has become more subtle, suksham. You can't see it, it goes already almost beyond the grasp of senses, you see. So as the things become more and more powerful, they become more and more subtle. This is the first principle to understand the mystery of life. The second principle is that they become insensible. The sense organs are not able to grasp those existence which is more and more powerful. I want to give you one example here, the example of time, for example. Now, where does time exist? Can you see it? Can you smell it? Can you taste it? Can you touch it? No. It's beyond the grasp of sense organs. but see the power of time. We helplessly grow with time. Every second we grow. Can we stop it? Nobody can stop. Everything which exists in this universe physically is subject to the vagaries of time. It is defined by time. The life of this table, the life of this microphone, this building, the planet Earth, our own life is all defined by time. With time we go away. And where does time exist? It is insensible. It cannot be sensed through the sense organs. So as the things become more and more insensible, they become more and more powerful. Or the other way around. As the things become more powerful, they become insensible. So we should not put too much emphasis on our sense organs and their perception power. We cannot grasp the more subtle existence through our sense organs. And that is why in Kenopolis they say that why can't your eyes see the soul? They say, no, how can the eyes see the soul? Because the soul which enables eyes to see to see anything. The power of eyes comes from the soul. How can eyes see the soul? And so does apply to other organs of our sense perception. So these are three principles. Then another principle I want to emphasize is for any creation you need consciousness. Human being, I can create or you can create this microphone, we can create this table, but this table cannot create anything. If you ask this table to create something, or if you ask this chair to create, or this building to create, it cannot create anything. Because it does not have consciousness. For any creation you need consciousness. And the higher the consciousness, the more profound the creation would be. We can create aircraft, we can create submarines, we can create atom bombs, we can create many things today. But animal cannot create that. Animal can also create, but their creation is much lower quality because their consciousness is lower quality. So for any creation you need consciousness. Nothing can be created without consciousness. This is another fundamental principle of life. Therefore, to say that this universe was created by some consciousness is right. Without any consciousness, this cannot be created. It's impossible to create. And the science sometimes say that the life has come out of what you call carbon and protein, or some biochemical combination in the brain. The life comes out and life goes. No life can be created without consciousness. You can give any single example in this universe where life can be created without consciousness. Can you create anything without your mind? You have to first think. Any creation takes place first in the non-physical form in your mind, and then it takes the physical form. If you want to create a painting, you must think what you want to create. If I want to write a book, I must think what I want to write. So the creation has to take place in non-physical form, and then it is put into the physical form later on. So this is how these 4 or 5 principles of life work. This is just a small summary, but if we can understand these principles, then I think it becomes easier for us to understand the mysteries of life. Because the consciousness which creates and regulates this universe exists in us. It is also the universal consciousness. You can call it by any name. You can call it Ram or Krishna or Allah or Christ, doesn't matter. But there is a consciousness in this universe which has created this universe and which regulates this universe. In fact, if you see, as soon as the consciousness goes out of our body is useless. It can't even sustain itself for a few hours. So it is the consciousness which sustains it. It is the consciousness which creates everything. So these are some of the questions which I have tried to address in this book. The first part of the book is, I would call it macro, in the sense dealing with the universal issues. The second part is individual, that deals with individual human being. Who am I and how the mind and intellect work, and what is the concept of Maya, and how the theory of karma operates, and how can we reach happiness. So this is how the book presents, unfolds itself. I'm sure it is not the ultimate word. I'm sure scholars like Dr. Karan Singh and many other scholars can further help in enriching these concepts. because their knowledge is far more profound than mine. I'm still in the process of learning, so I'm happy that Dr. Karan Singh has agreed to come and give his address on these issues today. And I'm also thankful to all of you for coming in large number. I hope you would enjoy reading the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction, sir. I would now request Dr. Karan Singh to formally launch the book. I request Dr. Karan Singh to kindly address the audience.
Ambassador Gauri Shankar Gupta, Publisher Amarnath Verma, Archana Lakhotia, and members of the audience, many old friends, getting older, like all of us, and many young friends too. One thing is now quite clear, that humanity is at a crossroads. With the tremendous growth of science and technology, we have today got the most extraordinary capacities for destruction and for creation. And therefore we are now at a crossroads as to whether, with all the knowledge that we've got, we can produce the wisdom that is required to use that knowledge creatively. We are facing an environmental crisis, a population crisis, a crisis of destructive weaponry, and a crisis of consciousness. All these multiple crises have now, as it were, converged in our own lifetimes. And there are two models of what will happen to the human race. I'm talking now not of the universe, but of the human race. Arthur Koestler, who is a Central European philosopher, he has a theory that the human race is a race destined and designed for self-destruction. Because of an engineering defect in the human cortex, whereby the thinking and the feeling aspects are inadequately linked. In other words, what we think, we do not necessarily do. As Duryodhana says, Janami dharmam, nacham me pravritti, janami adharmam, nacham me nivritti. I know what is dharma, but I am not attracted to it. I know what is adharma, but I am attracted to it. What to do? So there is a split between the thinking and the feeling elements in the human being. And therefore, according to Koestler, the human race is bound sooner or later to end in self-destruction. The alternative scenario is Sri Aurobindo, who holds that the process of evolution is inevitable. And in the same way as life has evolved from mineral to vegetable to matter and spirit, has now disappeared. With Einstein and his relativity, with Heisenberg and its probability, with Prigogine and the chaos theory, with all these new thinking, there now seems to be a convergence between the insights of the ancient mystics and the realities that science is bringing before us. It's a very fascinating area. And I'm not really, I remember reading many years ago, the first book I read on this was a book called Man the Unknown by Alexis Carrel. So I read this 60 years ago. Then there have been many very fascinating books. My good friend Fritjof Capra has written The Tao of Physics. And then the science fiction, the novels of Arthur Clarke and the films, they were their own mind-bending, they're mind-boggling. They bring before us possibilities that otherwise we would not have thought of. For example, the 2001 A Space Odyssey by Kubrick was really one of the greatest films made, I think, in the last century. It's a mind-boggling film because it started off a trend of a whole genre of science fiction films. So these possibilities now are opening up before us. The ancient wisdom, we must be clear what sort of ancient wisdom, and modern science, what sort of modern science. And it is, as he has pointed out, I think, this wisdom was not necessarily only in India. There must have been that ancient wisdom in Egypt. We still don't know, for example, what was the technology that built the pyramids. Or for that matter, what was the technology that built the Brihadishwara temple in Tanjavur? Or the ancient Greeks, the pre-Periclean Greece also, the mysteries and so on. So there's lots of material available in the history of various civilizations as to the real wisdom that was there and the new science. I'll just try and touch on 3 or 4 aspects that I think are becoming very clear. One is the point that he mentions, cosmology. If you remember, there were some religions or some philosophers which thought that the earth was about 10,000 years old or 20,000 years old. It was our philosophy alone that knew that the universe was Anadi Ananta, without beginning and without end. And that is now what is beginning to emerge. It's not only a Big Bang theory, it is a continuous continuum. It isn't as if something came from nothing. It's something could be rolling in and rolling out, but it is an Anadi Ananta. And I met the great Nobel laureate Dr. Chandrasekharan in Chicago many years ago. And I asked him, I said, Professor, how is it that we are the only people who knew, number one, of the billions upon billions of galaxies? Ananta Koti Brahmanda. If you take a galaxy as a Brahmanda, then Ananta Koti Brahmanda means infinite billions of universes. As he's mentioned a figure, maybe the figure is infinite. And how is it also that we knew about these huge periods of time, these aeons, a day of Brahma, and a night of Brahma is equal to so many million years, and then that goes on and on, time goes on forever. How did we get these concepts at that stage without instrumentation? So he said, quite frankly, I said, could it be that our rishis had these insights in elevated states of consciousness? And he said, it is just possible that this could have happened. Because evidently, to have these sort of concepts of billions upon endless billions of galaxies and vast areas of time, which only in our own lifetime the so-called modern science is beginning to realize, that is one area where there is definitely a convergence between the developing science. And let's remember, science is not static. Science is changing very rapidly. We are not scientists, so we don't really know about it. But every year, every day, there are new theories emerging. So one of the areas of convergence would be this whole area of cosmology. I think it's a fascinating study. No doubt he is. I've not really had the time to read the book yet, but he does mention that. The second is the unified field theory. As you know, the scientists are now looking for a unified field theory, a single theory that will explain all the varied forces and phenomena that are before us. Now, in our ancient wisdom, we have the correlate of that in the all-pervasive Brahman. Ishavasya sarvam yatkin jagatyam jagat. This entire universe, not only the tiny speck of dust that we call planet Earth, but the billions upon billions of galaxies in the endless universe around us are all illuminated by, inhabited by the same divine power. Brahma, Brahmevidam amritam pursta, Brahma pashtat Brahma dakshinaschotarena, adaschodham japrasritam, Brahmevidam vishwamidam parishtam. This magnificent universe is Brahma. Now, the idea of a single power that will explain everything, we have in our ancient wisdom the correlate of that in the concept of the all-pervasive Brahman. So that is the second area where it seems to me that there is a convergence. There is cosmology, vast spaces of time and endless universes. There is also this whole theory of what underlies this. Is there a single force? Is there a single power that can explain all these multiple and varied manifestations? We have that in the concept of the Brahman. Then another area, a cutting edge now of research, is the research into consciousness. Previously, the Western science thought that consciousness was like a screen against which various sensory objects were projected. But it now transpires that in fact consciousness is itself in a state of flux. And that therefore, as your consciousness changes, your awareness of what you see changes. For example, if there was a dog is very intelligent, I have a very intelligent dog at home. But if I were to tell him that I am coming here today to India International Center to release Master Gupta's book, he would not understand. Not because he is not intelligent, but because his mind has not evolved to the extent to be able to grasp such concepts. Now, the human mind is also in the state of evolution. And consciousness is something that our ancients knew, something which the modern scientists are beginning to realize. Consciousness is kinetic, consciousness can change, there can be elevated states of consciousness, and as the consciousness changes, our perception of the world around us changes. This is being proved in the West now by LSD and other psychedelic drugs. But long before that, in yoga, which is the most profound study of the human mind ever made, if you look at Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, for example, a great classic, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is a stilling of the modifications of the mind. And it also talks of the growth of consciousness. For example, the theory of the Kundalini. The theory of the Kundalini is that around the base of our spine 3.5 times, there is a power known as the Kundalini, which is normally dormant. But under certain circumstances, it can be aroused. And as it arises, it moves up the spine. And as it moves up the spine, it energizes chakras on the way until finally it floods into the 1,000-petal lotus in the brain. So the concept of changes of consciousness, of elevated states of consciousness, is something very deeply embedded in our traditions. And that is something which now Western science or modern science is trying to probe. There is a great deal of research going on nowadays on mind-brain relationships, on the functioning of the brain. Does the brain secrete thought, or does thought bring forth the brain? These are all questions now that are previously were looked upon as philosophical questions. They are now the subject of scientific research. So that is the third area of convergence. The cosmological convergence, the unified field theory convergence, the consciousness research convergence. And finally, on a more mundane plane, the whole concept of the interfaith movement that G. Gupta mentioned. Interfaith movement, as you know, began in 1983 with the first Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. And that was where Swami Vivekananda made such a dramatic impact. And as you know, we are celebrating the 150th birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda in 014. Now, the interfaith movement began in 1893. In the 20th century, a large number of events took place, a large number of organizations came into being, interfaith organizations, and this process is continuing. Now, the basis of the interfaith movement, again, is to be found in our ancient wisdom. And it is found, for example, in one single sutra from the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, the wise call it by many names. The whole concept of the multiplicity of paths to the divine is something that is deeply embedded in our cultural, in our Vedic and cultural background. We've never said that there's only one path to the divine. Who are we, creatures on a tiny speck of dust in the universe, to lay down that the illimitable splendor of the divine can appear only at this time and at this place and in this form? It's unacceptable. You can say that for you, I can say for me, my religion is best or my view is best. But I cannot say that because you do not follow that, you can be blown up or tortured or massacred or killed. So the concept of the multiplicity of paths to the divine, यथा नद्यः सन्दमाना समुद्रे अस्तं गच्छन्ति नाम रूपे विहाय तथा विद्वान् नाम रूपात् मुक्तः परात् परं पुरुषमपैति। ये जितने मतांतर हैं, जितने धर्म हैं, अलग अलग स्थान में पैदा हो सकते हैं, लेकिन अंततोगत्वा उनकी मंजिल मकसूद अलग नहीं हो सकती, उनका लक्ष्य अलग नहीं हो सकता. They all go to the same goal. Now this concept also is the very basis of our philosophy, and this also can be used, because what is happening is the religions diverge so much that they began destroying each other. Even as I speak today, people are being killed in the hundreds and thousands in the name of religion or inter-religious conflicts, and therefore we have to rediscover the essence of the interfaith movement, which we can find in our ancient wisdom. Then we come to another concept, the concept, for example, of socialism, of everybody getting a fair deal, not a few people flourishing and the masses floundering. There again, sarve pi sukhina santu, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukha bhag bhave. What an extraordinary concept. May all beings be sarve pi sukhina, all beings be healthy. Sarve santu niramaya, may all beings be healthy. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu, may all beings witness beautiful sights. Ma kaschit dukha bhag bhave, may nobody have to undergo suffering. What greater socialism, or what greater definition of socialism than that? Again, we can trace it back to our ancient wisdom. So when we talk of our ancient wisdom, we are not talking reactionary fundamentalism, or we are not talking revanchism. We are not saying that everything we had before, whatever is there, atom bomb bhi hamare paas the, ye bhi hamare paas the, computer bhi hamare paas the. I am not going into that. That is not my stand. My stand is that the essential philosophical concepts that are now the subject of research in modern science, they can learn a great deal from our ancient wisdom. And I think if I have understood Gauri Shankarji correctly, that is the whole thrust of his book. I think he's a brave man. Anybody who claims to unravel the mysteries of life must be unusually brave. And also, anybody who agrees to release the book has to also have some kind of bravery. I was rather astounded to see the poster. It gives the impression as if I am unraveling the mysteries. उनका नाम छोटा सा है, मेरा नाम बड़ा रखा हुआ है, बड़ी ज़्यादती है. I have no capacity to unravel the mysteries of life. However, as I go through life, I find that no, that's not true. That's not true. That's a common misconception, as Shri Suresh Goyal will no doubt point out. But I am interested. I'm basically interested in the Upanishads. You see, the Upanishads, to my mind, are the high watermark of our philosophy. There are lots of, we've got such a lot. We have the Puranas, we have the Itihasas, we have all. But it is the Upanishads basically that are the throat. They are the real basis of our thought. And I suggest that anybody who wants to look into the ancient wisdom has got to study the Upanishads. All the concepts that I mentioned are all found in the Upanishads. And I find these are quite astounding. All these, for example, these 5 points that I mentioned. The cosmological point, the unified field theory, the consciousness research, the interfaith movement, the correct definition of socialism, all of these are to be found in our wisdom. But we've got to adjust them, we've got to explain them, we've got to articulate them in contemporary terms. That's all that I'm trying to do. I have no claim to any originality. What I try to do around the world is to explain in comprehensible language the basic message of the Upanishads. I call it Vedanta today, as you know, I've spoken on that around the world. I'm speaking on Swami Vivekananda in UNESCO early next month. So that is what I try and do. That is my Swadharma, if you like, or my karma. But I must congratulate you, Gauri Shankarji, for all the study that he's put into it. And it is very good that our foreign service ambassadors are really, apart from presumably doing their diplomatic duties, also being able to spend such a lot of time on a subject like this and making the subject comprehensive and comprehensible to lay people and to the non-technical people. So thank you all very much, and my good wishes are with you. I may as well end with a Vedic prayer. Bhadram karnebhi shinuyama deva Bhadram pashyemakshabhiya jatraha Sthire range sustuvang shastanubhe Vyashem deva hitam yada yuhi.
Thank you very much, sir, for your participation despite your busy schedule.
I have an engagement with Lord Shiva at 8 o'clock. I don't know how many of you are following Devo Videv Mahadev. मैंने इनसे कहा था, मैंने कहा एक शर्त पे मैं आऊँगा कि मुझे आप 7:15 7:30 फारिग कर दीजिए ताकि शिव जी के साथ जो हमारी भेंट होती है रोज शाम को उसमें कोई विघ्न न पड़े. तो थैंक यू वेरी मच.